All right, guys, we're live. It's Justin Stenstrom from Elite Man Magazine, and my guest today is Charlie Kirk from what's the name of the organization you have, Charlie?
Turning Point USA.
Turning Point USA. So you came on my radar probably a year or so ago on social media, and I just started watching like clips of your videos on social issues and politics and the election, all this stuff. And you were one of the people that really kind of stuck out as like really knowing his stuff. And I know you're a younger guy too, but you've been doing this for years now. And, you know, the Ben Shapiro's of the world, Candace Owens's. I really love your take on social issues and politics and just kind of that conservative voice, which I feel like is lost, especially in the younger generation. So I'm excited to bring you on, man, especially with all the chaos going on right now with the election and stuff. It's a huge privilege to have you on the show today.
Thank you. Yeah, I deeply appreciate that. And we've had a good couple years, and we're just getting started. It's not the best set of circumstances for our country, but we're doing well. So I guess that more and more people are going to be seeking out our voice. So.
Yeah. So I want to like kind of dive into a bunch of different issues today and sort of jump around, but I know you primarily focus on politics, of course, but you also have, like I mentioned, a good conservative voice, and especially as a younger guy. I believe you're like 27, 28 years old, but you've been 27. You've been doing this now for a number of years. I looked it up. What made you get into this as a younger guy? Because I'm 29 right now. People my age, our age, most of them are crazy liberals at this point. They have like a really distorted view on how the world works and socialism and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of less people kind of like who think how we do. How did you as a younger guy get into that?
Yeah, I mean, I started this when I was 18 instead of going to college. I always had a passion for history and for politics. Went to a school that was in some ways very center-left. A lot of my teachers were liberals, outspoken, and I would just ask questions, and I was really less than satisfied in a lot of their responses. And you know, the entire theme of my kind of high school career, I guess you could call it, was that America's an awful place. We have to do a lot of dramatic social action to try and apologize and repent for something that we didn't do, and we didn't even know the people who did it. And you're an awful person based on your skin color, and you're not allowed to have different ideas. And I had some good teachers mixed within that, but that was kind of the ideological tilt of the entire high school that I went to. And that always just bothered me. And I would just ask questions, and I would be less than thrilled with some of the answers, such as, if we're such an awful country, why do you still live here? I mean, that was kind of a very basic elementary style, argument. I still make that kind of argument today because it's true. And they'd say, oh, well, there's no better place. Well, if there's no better place, then why do you do nothing but complain about it the entire time? And so I kind of stumbled into this. I've always loved the collision of ideas, philosophy, history, and I grew more fond of our culture, who we are as Americans, what makes us different, what really drives us. Is it a culture worth defending, which of course it is, and then also how to best articulate that. So I started that when I was 18, Turning Point USA, had no money, no connections, no idea what I was doing. Been doing it about 8.5 years. It'll be 9 years in June. It's been the most amazing experience. So now we're doing 2 hours of radio a day. We do 2 podcasts a day. Got 160 people that work for us at Turning Point USA. Have a whole operation at Turning Point Action. So we're very busy, and we're kind of in the hopefully saving Western civilization business.
What's your basic premise of Turning Point USA? Like, what's the main message you want to get across, and you try to tell people when you go on shows like this, or Fox News, which I've seen you on a number of times? Some of the outlets, like when people are basically asking you what your biggest goal is, what is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's in some ways the target is always changing, kind of based on where the tone and the tenor of the country is, of kind of what people will gravitate towards and what they'll absorb. I'd say that right now, our main focus is we actually live in the greatest country ever to exist in the history of the world. Understand that and deeply understand our history before you actually decide to post a black square on social media or say something really foolish, politically, because you probably have no idea what you're talking about. But if you do that, then you're going to have to contest an interface as to why you want to radically deconstruct this beautiful gift that we've been given. And that's really something that's a harder argument to make. There's always an inclination towards revolution for upper middle class privileged spoiled brats because they have no idea why they have everything so good around them, or even that they have everything so good around them. So they find their identity and purpose in the deconstruction of everything that has been given before them. And you find this in the upper middle class households of some of the most wealthy neighborhoods in America, whether it be in Greenwich, Connecticut, or Beverly Hills, California, Highland Park, Dallas. Palm Beach, Florida, kids that really have upper middle class income levels, they'll tend to be really, really liberal. And sometimes their parents are liberal or they'll be more moderately liberal. But the point is their kids are way more left wing. It's because they have a guilt complex for what they have. They're misunderstanding how wealth is created. They have no appreciation for this country. They think that you can easily centralize and redistribute wealth without any sort of consequences, and that everyone who gets the wealth will immediately be incentivized to go create their own life for themselves, which of course is completely wrong and foolish. And so you have all these different things that then happen. And basically my position right now, and I'm not the only one that does this, you mentioned some of the names as well, Candace and Ben are really close friends and they do a great job. And everyone kind of has their own unique flavor of how we go about doing this, which I think it makes really exciting. Yeah. Of kind of how we approach it. And no one's wrong and no one is incorrect. It's just we all have a different way of kind of forming the argument and doing what we do every day. And it kind of makes the conservative movement, I think, stronger because of it. But kind of where my argument right now is go take responsibility for your actions, spend more time creating and less time complaining. Why are you so angry? Because you live in this incredible country. We're not a racist country. We're not nearly as unequal as you might think. And the problems that we actually do have are problems you don't want to talk about. We have a problem of not taking responsibility. We have a problem of family creation. We have a problem of marriage. We have a problem of civilizational collapse. We have a problem of really hyper-concentrated corporate power. I'm happy to go through all of those things, and yet they don't want to talk about that. The only problems they want to talk about is racial injustice, which is nonsense. It is a micron of a problem in a long litany of things, and I would even say that the problem is over-amplified, misrepresented, and kind of misappropriated as to who the actual villain is. And so, considering that as my position, I have plenty of content and things to talk about, and our audience is growing because there's just so few of us that are kind of doing this every single day. Yeah. But it's growing. There's more and more every day, but it's still small considering the whole population.
And as someone, like I said, as young as you are and have been doing this for a while, and then you have, combine, you factor that in with the people that you're trying to reach, and you reach older people as well, for sure. But, as someone kind of getting that younger generation on board with the conservative movement, what's the biggest change that you'd like to make to how things are going right now so that so many younger people aren't sort of brainwashed into that crazy liberal think? Like this, you can be liberal, moderate liberal, whatever, sort of towards the middle, but like what's going on the past couple of years, especially with the defund the police and, the Black Lives Matter and the Antifa support and all this just socialism. What is your biggest wish that you could kind of impart on the younger generation, or what do you try to get across to them?
There's a couple things. I mean, I think that one of the things that we have to do is try to make sure people are informed, not just opinionated. And a lot of these people think they have a really good understanding of really what's happening in the world, and they don't. We as conservatives have it differently. We actually know all the left's arguments. By definition, we were friends with these people, went to their schools, we went to high school with them, we deal with them on social media. So it's actually not the case for young conservatives. There are very few young conservatives that don't know the top authors in literature and arguments of the left. The left has no exposure at all whatsoever to what conservatives think and believe. And then even beyond that, they have a hostility towards even interfacing to try to pursue that. They don't want to have an opinion with the other side. They don't want to have a conversation with the other side. They don't want to hear the other opinion. They don't want to have a conversation. They don't want to have dialogue. They don't want to have discourse. They don't want to have any form of exploration of truth. Instead, it's, I already have all the answers at age 16 because I watched a couple TikTok videos. Don't you understand how smart I am? And everyone before me is a racist. Like, that's probably oversimplified. And you probably have a lot of thinking to do and a lot of discourse to do. And understand that Candace, Ben, and myself, and some of the names you mentioned, we have almost a decade of experience of interfacing with the other side, of talking to liberals, of going out of our way to read their literature, of going out of our way to actually go into college campuses. Candace was on the left. She knows what they think. She knows what drives them. And there's a special place for those of us that actually had to endure their nonsense for quite some time, because we're really not surprised by anything they do, and we're better able to predict it. We're able to communicate to those people. But I will say this, on top of all those other different things that are happening, we have to be very clear as to why is it now you can't even have a differing opinion and then you're stifled and you're shut up completely. And the reason is that when you have differing opinions, people will generally then become pretty nuanced, right? So they'll basically end up getting in a position of, well, I agree with Charlie on this and I agree with the left on that, and I'm somewhere in the middle. Well, people in the middle make really bad revolutionaries. So people in the middle are very unlikely to go burn down a civilization and burn down a building. They're probably just going to go build a family and build a life. And what ends up happening is they end up actually tilting more towards the right as they get older, because those values are about kind of preserving what you worked for. Yeah. Well, the left has no interest in creating people that are less likely to be revolutionaries. They want people to be more likely to storm the Bastille, more likely to get in positions of power and to exercise their dogmatic, very specific worldview. And in a lot of different ways, you know, we as conservatives just want the country to have a little bit more nuance. Like, that would be really nice. If all of a sudden that you heard something on television, you say, well, maybe Trump isn't the worst person ever to occupy the White House. That'd be a wonderful statement to fill the airwaves of CNN. But the narrative and the meta-narrative that is created on these cable television networks is you have this gross parasite that has infected our federal government, and any means of social action is now morally justified because Benito Mussolini has been reincarnated and is now the president of the United States. And then that then allows the moral justification for the burning of buildings, the toppling of statues, the suppression of speech, and also the lack of nuance. And so I'm afraid that the reaction to Trump has now created the most illiberal group of American political, you know, kind of the most illiberal group of American people politically since the KKK. And it's a very dangerous kind of sequence of events.
Yeah. I was actually briefly dating this girl over the summer, and super liberal girl. She's a teacher. She was a teacher out in Brooklyn. And it was right around the time of the riots and all that stuff happening, a couple months after the Floyd thing. And she had a student, and the education system in America is absolute shit. It's terrible. You know, as you know, you're probably well aware of this. But she had a student who wrote a mini, like, not even a paper, but it was a few paragraphs, and he basically was talking about how great the riots were because he was able to come up on some free Nikes from the store because him and his friends had looted a building. And blew my mind when this teacher, who I was briefly dating, said she gave the kid an A on the paper because, you know, she's talking about the social injustice and how actually those Nikes were, you know, good for him because he didn't have enough money to pay for it and all this other nonsense. And, you know, needless to say, this person and I didn't last because of these types of issues that she believed in. You know, who knew how radical she was before it all started. But my point is that a lot of these people, like teachers especially, not like they're all bad, but a lot of these people on the left, they're very intolerant of others' beliefs that don't align with what you are. So a lot of these people, and me as a Trump supporter, she basically said too at one point, it's either Trump or me. Like, we can't have this relationship if you support Trump. And I said, all right, see you later. That was the end of it, actually. But it was basically like, you know, as a party that's supposed to be tolerant of all people, of all beliefs, of all, you know, creeds, religions, etc., I find a lot of these people to be the most intolerant people of all. And it's like, if you want to be accepting of everybody, you got to be accepting of the side of that you don't agree with. And that includes Trump supporters or Trump fans or believers in conservative values. Just as I would have accepted her despite some of those radical views, I feel like a lot of people on the left don't have the same viewpoint for other people.
No, you're exactly right. And I'll say this, and I'll add the correct, you know, prefacing and nuance on this. No one should ever date or create a life partner with someone that has a different political opinion or religious opinion. That is a spell for a divorce. And you might say, well, how that's very intolerant of you. But you should absolutely be intolerant in your selection of a life partner. That is the most intolerant you should be. In fact, that's the most selective you should be.
That's a good point, though.
I mean, if that is the case, then a lot of people's dating decisions would be a lot different. That is when you're the most intolerant, okay? Yeah. So when I have my political viewpoints and when I look at kind of what I want to do, what kind of society I want to create and the kind of political party and the kind of political movement I want to have, it's different than in that decision, of which you made the right decision there. What I'm saying, though, is it shouldn't surprise you that the left is all of a sudden becoming the movement of absolute and total intolerance. These people are not liberals. There's difference between liberals and leftists. Liberals believe that America is generally a good place. It has its flaws, but they probably would believe that they need more social action or more government programs to try to right us of some wrongs. I can deal with a liberal. I think some liberals and I agree on certain things, especially when it comes to freedom of speech and foreign wars and stuff like that. Probably disagree with them on borders and language and culture and those sorts of things. But I bet they could probably see my side. A liberal is someone like Alan Dershowitz. A leftist is like someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who believes that the fact that we hold an opinion that is different than hers, then we're evil, then we're wrong. We must be suppressed. We must be shut up. We must be obliterated. And that entire viewpoint has now infected like a parasite. It's parasitically now infected the entire Democrat Party. And they are now a kind of flawed host, if you will, or they are now host of this idea where if anyone dares to say something we don't like, we are going to shut them up. And you can see where that heads. All of a sudden, if people are unable to communicate with those they disagree with, if all of a sudden they're unable to have differing opinions, eventually you're going to have a fracturing of the country. You see, freedom of speech worked. It actually worked from a utilitarian standpoint because it was a way to mitigate our differences. You could blow off some steam. You could all of a sudden talk to your friend and maybe say, oh, wow, I was kind of a fool with that idea. Yeah, that's kind of a stupid thing to think, defund the police. Why do so many people still believe in defund the police? Because they've never actually had to talk to somebody that has told them how dumb of an idea this is. So, of course, you're just going to endlessly talk to people that think it's a good idea. No one ever challenges it and just self-reinforces, and it calcifies and almost has this permanency. And then from that point forward, you find someone who doesn't want to defund the police. Instead of thinking that they might have a good idea, you just call them a racist. Like, you're a bad person. You hate black and brown people. No, actually, I actually love them, which is why I want more police. Shut up, racist, sit down, you're a KKK member. And then then all of a sudden you see these really bad ideas become permanent. And that's all because of the death of free speech. Free speech is where you could turn to your friend and be like, yo, it's actually, you're really misguided here on this Green New Deal. Well, why? See, all of a sudden it takes a receiver, right? You have to be willing to have that conversation. Now it's, hey, you're wrong with this Green New Deal thing. You're probably an evil Trump supporter. Where's your KKK hood? And all of a sudden the conversation ends. And you play this out in millions of micro interfaces, right, over the last 9 months. That's where you get the American political divide. The solution and the problem is because the solution is free speech. The problem is because you don't have it. And of course, we still have the First Amendment, but a lot of people are wearing these invisible handcuffs right now. Adam Smith had said the invisible hand. It's these invisible handcuffs. I'm afraid to break out. I'm afraid to say what I believe. I'm afraid to tell someone I disagree with them. I'm afraid to go out of my way on a social media post when someone says that we're all on indigenous land, like something really stupid, right? Or something where they say that, BLM Incorporated is the greatest thing ever, just whatever it is, right? All of a sudden they're afraid to comment on it because they're afraid to be called the worst thing you could be called in the human lexicon, right? Or the English lexicon. What's the worst little word I can look up? Racist. And they use it all the time and almost has this paralytic impact where everyone's like, not me. I'm not a racist. Yeah. Nope, not me. I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to go back to work. And then what ends up happening is the people that then have those more right-leaning views or those conservative views, they'll just talk to people they agree with and then they get radicalized. And I'm not saying that every single person that goes that way, but then there are people that actually end up entertaining really, really bad racial identity on the right. Very few people, not a lot of people, it happens every so often, but more of that is going to happen when all of a sudden you stop talking, right? And so this plays itself out where eventually the country will dissolve, and that's exactly what the left wants. This is a tactic for a dissolution of Western civilization.
Absolutely. Do you think, and this is kind of getting into other topics here, but do you think there is you can say conspiracy theory, you can say conspiracy facts when things actually turn out to be true, you can say deep state, whatever you want to call it, but do you think that there is a guided effort by, say, guys like George Soros and even Bill Gates, you can throw him into that category, some of these guys who want to systematically revolutionize America, change it, and actually turn it more into a globalist world that we live in as opposed to an individual country, divided countries and having their own free will to do as they want?
Soros, absolutely. And just read the World Economic Forum, the Great Reset. They outline this themselves. I mean, they want the dissolution of our borders. They want the complete disintegration of our civilization. I mean, they admit this. And so, again, conspiracy theory, by the way, is a term that was used by the Central Intelligence Agency against our populace to try and stifle discussion and debate and try to get people out of the mainstream. With that being said, there's people that believe wacky things.
Yeah.
Okay? So not every single person that then all of a sudden says, well, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I think that there's actual robots flowing through our water that are spying on our intestines. I heard that one the other day. Very interesting.
That's
compelling.
Pretty crazy.
Probably not true.
Yeah.
Right? And so, but again, I'm willing to entertain it. And I entertained it for about 7.5 seconds. I said, that's probably not happening, but show me the evidence, right?
Yeah.
However, there's plenty of instances, and a great one that I'll tell you that I lived through, that is just the best example of this that has been now in popular culture. Everyone talks about it, which if I came on this podcast right here, if it existed 8 years ago, I don't know if it did or not, but we were just talking 8 years ago, and I told you that Bill Clinton was flying on Lolita Express with Jeffrey Epstein to a private island.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, we would have said timeout conspiracy theory. We'd have to do all these kind of different little kind of asterisks, like not proven, allegedly, all these different things, right? And now people know this is true.
27 times,
and,
right?
Right, exactly. And so now we know this has happened. Now why? It's because the facts eventually broke the barrier that they were trying to create to try to prevent us from talking about this. And the same thing with the Catholic Church in the 1960s and 70s. If I would have told you in the early 1960s that there was a network of 300 to 400 child molesting priests in Boston that were going out of their way and sexually raping young children in Boston, you would have had me put into a mental clinic and you said, there's no way this is happening. The Catholic Church is the greatest thing ever in Boston. Now, by the way, a lot of my friends are Catholic. I have a lot of respect for a lot of people that are Catholics. I just use this example as institutional corruption that transcended institutional lines, right? So it was political, it was media, it was religious, and all of a sudden it blew up, and it happened everywhere. Los Angeles diocese, San Francisco diocese, Dallas diocese, Chicago diocese, Detroit diocese, everywhere this was happening. And it turned out that was a literal conspiracy, right? Same with the Boy Scouts of America. I'm an Eagle Scout. For years, we heard about sexual assault claims and sexual abuse claims in the Boy Scouts of America. Boy Scouts of America always said, oh, it's a couple isolated incidents, we've dealt with it. Just came out last week, 89,000 former members of the Boy Scouts of America have come out and said that they were sexually abused by people in the hierarchy of the Boy Scouts of America. Why do I use all these examples? Hiding in plain sight, we have seen massive pockets of untouched evil that once we expose it, we're like, yeah, we always knew that. No, you didn't. And you try to shut us up when we tried talking about it. And so here's a really important thought experiment. And I say this, by the way, and there's plenty of people that just talk about things that just aren't true. I don't do that. I ask questions, and I also don't tell you to call timeout when I hear something that might be a little provocative. I think, well, maybe it's true, maybe not. And that's also what freedom of speech is. It makes you go deeper into ideas. But think to yourself, what are they telling you that is not true that actually might be true right now? That's something that's really important to wrestle with, because the law of averages tell you right now there's something that we're believing, that we're accepting, that eventually will come to light to be proven not true. What that is, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I have some theories. There's plenty of things I can think of.
Yeah, we'll get into a little bit of that, I think, what you're alluding to maybe later. But the topic of censorship is one. So here's the three big issues, too, by the way. And I made a podcast probably a month or two ago of why I'm voting for Trump and why, I got a little backlash from it, which I kind of expected. But I think most people understood where I was coming from. But the three big issues I see this country facing right now are censorship, socialism, and, of course, the shutdown, which has radically changed the way we live the past, 6 to 7 months, 8 months probably now. But those are the three big ones. But one of the ones that's been kind of hanging around for the past few years that's gone sort of under the radar until lately is censorship. And that has been, conservative voices especially have been getting censored left and right. Even guys like Alex Jones, who I'm not even really a fan of. I don't really like his stuff. I don't listen to his content much. But when he got censored a few years back and got deplatformed off everything, I was like, this is a huge step in the wrong direction. Even if you don't like this guy, which I didn't like him at the time. I like him a little bit more now, but I don't really follow his stuff. It's a huge mistake to do that, because once you get one guy like that down, everybody's going to start following. And now they've even started censoring Trump the last few months with the election stuff that he's posting. Every single post that he has now on Facebook comes with a little asterisk underneath it saying that Joe Biden's the president-elect, which he's not. But the point is, once you start censoring people online or anywhere, it becomes a huge problem. Like we were talking about a moment ago, you can't hear the other side. And then you become more radicalized in your belief because you're just sitting around talking, discussing with the same people, having that one viewpoint. There's no place for discourse or argument or actually coming up with new ideas. What's your take on censorship, though?
Well, I agree. And even if there's people you disagree with that are being censored or people you don't like their style, you should absolutely defend their right to be able to have platform access. And the Alex Jones case is really creepy because all the tech companies did it at once.
Yeah.
They almost acted as a cartel. They acted against cartel laws that we had, and they all deplatformed him at once. And it went from there, and no one said anything. And then some people said something.
Well, they said it was justified because he had these crazy conspiracy theories and this and that, and it was like, oh, well, he can't be saying this nonsense because it's all unproven, and the Sandy Hook thing, he was wrong about Sandy Hook. But that's what they said. They justified it, and then once you justify that, everything else can be justified.
Yeah, and without getting too far into the details of that, it's now become a pattern, right? And so they used that as their opening shot, and then the pattern now has been, oh, we're going to censor the New York Post from sharing a Hunter Biden story that's been verified. Now we're going to censor Kayleigh McEnany. And we knew that was going to happen. We knew that sequence of events was going to unfold. And look, censorship is one of the biggest issues in our country. And the reason this is happening is because we've given way too much power to data companies that engage in surveillance capitalism, where they sell you. You are a user. Only illegal drugs and social media call the people that use their products users, not customers, but users, because they're highly chemically addictive and they're designed to have you keep coming back. And one of the things that we have to get very serious about is, has social media and this entire craze towards kind of appeasing our digital pacifiers, which you can call your phone your digital pacifier, is that something that has actually made our country a better place? Are we exploring more ideas? Are we more mature? Are we more nuanced? And there's probably some benefits. We probably know more people's birthdays that we wouldn't otherwise know. We could probably keep better tabs on our friends. We could probably see a couple things that we wouldn't otherwise see. But generally, there's something really disturbing that's happening with the rise of social media. And you just take Facebook and Google, for example. Their combined market cap is almost $2 trillion if you put them together. $2 trillion. Now, their predominant value is really sourced in their data. They're not making anything in hardware. Now, Google does fiber and Facebook has Oculus, but the main part of their value is you. So they have successfully mined the American population. So there's a lot of hatred on the American left for ExxonMobil or for Continental Resources. Say what you will about them, they actually have to extract something that you know you're going to use. Driving a car, keeping a hospital, going in the middle of the night in a snowstorm in New Hampshire, right? There's an actual mineral quality to the extraction of oil and natural gas. What is Facebook mining every single day? What are they fracking? Humans. Facebook is fracking human beings. Seriously.
Yeah.
They are fracking 5,000 unique data points on every single American citizen, profiling, predicting, and addicting. Profiling, mining, and addicting every single American to then be able to say, how can I make you come back to our product, which would come back to our network, and then buy products from the other biggest companies that can afford our advertising rates. And so what we have here, the only reason why censorship is now the question it is not because of the government. This is a really important point. The government's, we've done our job. We've taken over the Senate. We've appointed justices. If you and I wanted to have this podcast discussion right now in front of the state house in Austin, we could do it. We could apply for a free speech certificate. We go do that. Big megaphones and have a rally, whatever. Okay? That would be protected speech, even if we were saying wacko things. But if you and I want to say this on YouTube, we are now subject to a censor who's wearing his pajamas in Menlo Park that's working for Facebook or Google. That's very creepy. And now we have the entire kind of, let's say, the landscape of speech is now very concentrated to a group of companies, and even more creepy, a group of people that control these companies that very well could determine whether or not you and I are allowed to even speak at all.
Yeah. And I've heard too, I'm pretty sure this is true, I'm not 100%, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of these monitors now are actually Chinese individuals, either Chinese Americans or even working overseas from China that they hire as, just virtually hire, which is obviously very easy to do. And that's kind of scary too. Obviously, with what's going on and the fact that we're in sort of a covert war with China right now. And, there's many people that believe that they let this virus go on intentionally from Wuhan. And,
oh, no doubt. I believe that.
I believe it as well. And, so just the fact that they're now censoring a lot of our posts and taking over a lot of our organizations, and you have like Facebook and Twitter, a lot of these CEOs and founders of these companies are directly aligned with China. And then you have the NBA, and there's so many companies and organizations in America that have ties to China. It's kind of scary when you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, the Chinese Communist Party basically runs our country, and it's because of it's a bipartisan group of corporate elites that sold out our country and wanted to get a maximized profit margin, but didn't care if they hollowed out the backbone of our country.
Yeah, it's been happening for a long time. And speaking of the news, like the fake news, and 95% of the coverage of Trump this election cycle was negative. There was a stat that came out a couple weeks ago. It just it's kind of shocking to see how one-sided they really are, and I think that's a huge problem as well with why a lot of these people are sort of brainwashed into believing a certain belief and not having at least the open-mindedness to consider another point of view. I think the fake news is a big part of that. I'm just wondering if you have any ideas on how that could be corrected or fixed.
Yeah, I mean, it starts with what you consume. So every person here should unsubscribe from Apple News. Every person should subscribe to our podcast, your podcast. Get news from people you trust, that they won't allow you to be censored. Go out of your way to support those people. And then we need to just start creating new institutions. We need to support groups like Just the News. We need to support Breitbart. We need to support all these guys that are going out of their way to do the hard work and do the actual work that is necessary to cover the news and information that is really missing on the landscape right now. And look, the CNNs and the New York Times, they're going to have a very difficult business model to justify with their very, very heavy overhead the moment if Trump leaves office in January and some of these election litigation and these fights don't go the way we want them to. Because all of a sudden the let's remove Trump at all costs thing is not going to work that well. And people are then now going to turn on CNN and say, wait a second, we control the government. What are we actually doing? And they're going to have a tapering off effect and their business model is going to implode. And what they're going to do, and you'll be able to play this clip back in 6 months from now, they're going to try to act as if the KKK has like Operation Paperclip and they've infiltrated the government. We have to go find all the white supremacists that have infiltrated our country, which is insane, not true. But the point is that they're going to keep the narrative going. They're going to say that Trump is still the enemy, even though he's not in office. Trump supporters are the ones that are blocking the agenda. The villain is not going to change. It's not. The only thing that will change is how they present the villain. And that CNN and New York Times, they do villain-based journalism. And the only villain that they are willing to touch are conservatives. That we are the worst thing ever, that Trump supporters are venom, that we must be eradicated, that the entire population must be metaphorically inoculated against us, and that they have any moral justification to destroy us at any means necessary.
Yeah, it's pretty sickening, the just one-sidedness and bias that's so apparent. But then you have, Newsmax and I think OAN, American News Network, whatever the hell it's called. I hope they get on Comcast soon because they're not on Comcast, but they are on DirecTV. And there's some other stations out there that are coming up that I think are going to take a lot of those viewerships.
Yeah, and I tell older people that are like, well, I don't get the channels I want. Okay, so go get a Roku, and then all of a sudden you can access YouTube on your television screen,
yeah.
Right? Or just go get a Samsung Smart TV, which I don't love Samsung, but whatever. The point is that if you get a smart TV, then your cable provider means next to nothing. All you have to do then is your internet connection becomes your television. So just go watch YouTube on your TV. That's what I do every night. I'll go watch lectures or updates from people I actually enjoy. I don't actually watch cable news anymore. Very few people do. And then you can get the best of Newsmax, you can get the best of all these other things. And that's one way you can short circuit it. Again, I know YouTube censors us. That's not the point. The point is you could also get Rumble on there. You can get other platforms where all of a sudden your TV should no longer just be the cable box that it's affiliated with. It should be just nothing more than a screen or a portal to millions of other destinations that cannot be touched or censored.
Yeah, that's the beauty about the tech age that we're living in. Like, that's the good part of the things that we have is we have this open. Even the podcast right now, like, we have the ability to reach a lot of people doing this type of thing.
That's right.
What I want to ask you about the sort of war on men, I guess you could call it, of the past few years, and what your take is on the changing gender roles and how sort of the American man has been under attack in many ways by the left and by some of these extremists, and what your advice is for guys listening to the show.
Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely a war on men in our country, and I mean, men are far more likely to die at work, far more likely to commit suicide, far more likely to go to prison, far less likely to graduate from college, get a master's degree, get a doctoral degree, far more likely to go into bankruptcy, far more likely to go to war and die at war, all these sorts of different metrics. I could go on and on and on. And yet we're supposed to believe that we're living in some sort of patriarchy, that we're living in some sort of heteronormative cisgender power struggle. It is absolute foolishness. And what we have done is we've designed all of our systems, we've hyper-feminized our educational system, and it's created really unhappy women by the time they reach 30 years old. They're not married. And that, by the way, there's plenty of corporate achieving women that deserve to be recognized for what they've done. most of which I've met, are incredibly miserable people. So what they end up doing is they move to the urban cities in our country. They end up marrying these metrosexual men, and no offense to them, but it's just the way it is. It's just very low on muscle mass and on ambition and ambition, and they're just they're more kind of a partner than a husband.
Yeah.
And then what ends up happening, if you play this out over time, you have women that end up then filling the archetypical male in the relationship, not the female. And I'm a huge believer in traditional gender roles. They're there for a reason. That's not to say, and everyone says, well, you just want women barefoot in the kitchen. I've never said that, but I do think that women should be able to be given the freedom and the flexibility to be able to have a family and raise that family if they want. And we should be able to have an economy where the man can be the sole breadwinner for the family and the woman doesn't have to go into the workforce economically and then have to provide. So that plays a role on it too. But a lot of this is that, look, I'm not a singular blame on here, because I think that there's some people that overly emphasize the societal or overly emphasize the individual. I'm actually going to emphasize both. I think that men need to do a much better job of taking responsibility for their life when they turn 16, 17, or 18, which means you play a lot less video games, you stop doing drugs, stop doing alcohol, actually go find something worthwhile and commit yourself to that and go follow I'm a Christian. I think this all comes from the Bible. Actually follow the laws and the teaching of the Bible and apply that correctly. But also, we got a lot of work to do to make sure that the society that we're actually entering, that we're actually sending young men into, is not all of a sudden going to be nearly impossible for them to do that, where it's the exception, not the rule for you. And so I think it's actually a blend of both, where it's the public policy decisions and also the kind of the infantilization of young men. And so all the things you're talking about are absolutely right. We're on pace to have 500,000 less babies next year than this year. We've been talking about this on our podcast for quite some time. We're the only podcast that has actually been calling it what it is, which is a civilizational collapse. I saw the Brookings Institution study early. We were laughed, we were mocked, we were ridiculed. I said as soon as the lockdowns came, we were going to see a decrease and a decline in birth rates, which is the opposite of what you think would happen, right? Less people at home, more people bored, more people confined. Escalation of birth rates? No. Why? I said because more people are doing birth control. More people now no longer consider children to be essential. They now consider children to be like, I'll have one of each. We have this secular humanization of our culture. We have this kind of devolution into believing that children are a burden, not a blessing, and men less likely to take ownership or responsibility for the family and do not have the social supports around them to make it possible. It's also economically unfeasible for them to make it happen. And now we're living through this really, really dangerous moment where we are going to have a population collapse and a civilizational collapse alongside it in our country. And so I'm happy to dive into what I think some remedies and solutions are to that. But for young men listening to this right now, I'll do the part of trying to demand a country and a public policy portfolio that make it easier for you. But seriously, go take responsibility for your life. Stop blaming other people and stop doing things that you're addicted to. That means drugs. That means looking at your phone on things you shouldn't be looking at. That means stop, acting in an impure, unpure way. That be loyal to an idea, be loyal to a person, be loyal to a set of values, and be loyal to a country. That is the idea of being an ultimate man in the West, is that you're loyal. But not just loyal to a woman, not just loyal to a country, but loyal to the value in the pursuit of truth, the value in the pursuit of beauty. And the reason why you've seen all these terrible trends, suicide, social isolation, drugs, all these sorts of things, is because we have not done those sorts of things. We haven't. And our parents did generally a really poor job. My parents did a good job, but I'm talking about parents in general in our generation did a horrible job. And now we're living the consequences of that. A lot there to unpack, so you can go any way you want. So.
There is a lot to unpack, but I think one of the biggest things too, and by the way, Dr. John Gray, I don't know if you're familiar with his work, the guy who wrote Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. I'm
familiar with the book, yeah.
Okay, he's a brilliant guy actually across like all fields. He's very, into health and all kinds of stuff, but he talks about sort of the same breakdown of the American the modern family in the past 50 years and how feminism is actually really bad. And especially now, like when it first started, there was a lot of good to it. There's certainly a lot of good, and then equal rights and all that stuff. That was all great. But over the years, like the last couple of decades, it's really gone to hell. And one of those reasons is there's always multiple reasons. It's a very complicated matter, but one of the biggest reasons is the incentivization of women to be single as opposed to marriage, and having, and especially in the black community. We've talked about this in the past as well on the podcast, and the breakdown of the family dynamic in the black community, especially where the father leaves and then the woman is relying on the government for, social benefits, welfare, etc. But that also transcends across, all races and across, all family dynamics. And I think it is a huge part of why men sort of don't really know their place in society, because the government has sort of come in the past few generations and taken over. Like, they're now the provider to a lot of these families. And guys,
I nuance. I think it's on both sides.
Yeah.
I do.
No,
I think that we've had an awful sequence of public policy decisions. I also think culturally we've done an awful job, and we've given young men a hall pass. I think it's both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So generally speaking, we got to make changes, I think, to the structure of the system and stop incentivizing as much. But also, guys certainly need to step up. And we talk about guys stepping up on this show all the time and being the provider.
Yeah, totally. So what ends up happening is if I spend too much time focusing on the public policy choices, then all of a sudden young men are like, oh, well, I'm just going to give up because it's impossible.
It's an excuse. Exactly.
And if I end up spending too much time on the individual, go improve your life, take application, you're not a victim, all of which are true, then all of a sudden they're going to lose a little bit of faith after a while because they're going to see how hard it actually is. So I feel if I do both, then I'm realistic to the young man that's going to have to apply himself and understands how difficult it's going to be. But what I find is that we're creating a generation of fully grown infants.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
That's what we're living through right now.
Absolutely agree. I think it comes down to responsibility and taking responsibility over your life.
That is the operative word.
The biggest thing right there. But as far as the shutdowns go, I want to get your take on that real quick. I know we got to wrap up in a couple minutes, but what is your take on the shutdowns and where we're at right now and where you think we should be heading with that whole, disaster of a government policy and just the last few months of how it's all been?
Open the country up fully. Trust people to make good choices. If you think masks work, then wear a mask. If you don't think they work, then don't wear a mask.
Love it.
Treat people like mature adults. Protect their liberty. I have been calling for the full opening of America since April 12th. I cannot believe this is still an issue.
Yeah.
I cannot believe that we have not opened our country. This is a mass power grab of social reconstructionism, of social conditioning, of the Great Reset. And if anyone here is still abiding by lockdown orders, I got a lot of questions for you. You should disobey. You should disobey publicly. You should disobey daily. You should show them that these lockdown orders don't mean anything. There's nothing loving and compassionate about saving lives in asterisks by saying all of a sudden you're going to stay home. What is saving lives is respecting people's liberty to stay at home if they feel they need to against a virus that very well might infect you and kill you if you're over the age of 60 and you have a certain subset of underlying health conditions. That's called liberty. It's called responsibility. We have totally forgotten about that in our society, and we have these micromanagers that are coming in and saying, no, all of a sudden, I don't like this outburst in this community, no youth sports. And kids are like, it has nothing to do with youth sports. Nothing.
Yeah.
So what if a bunch of 8-year-olds get the Chinese coronavirus?
Nothing
Statistics
happens to them.
are, I mean, if they die from it, they have now beaten the odds. They're more likely to die from an accidental fireworks discharge. They're more likely to die driving to school or driving to an activity. The risk tolerance is perfectly acceptable for people under the age of 30 is what I mean. We have things that we tolerate in Western society that allow us to live a good life. If it's all about safetyism, then go send our entire generation to Rikers Island and give us 3 meals a day, and we'll never interact with another human being again. People think that's ludicrous. You're right. That's called no freedom and liberty. And so we have now created our entire country into Rikers Island.
Yeah. It's literally insane. I've been saying the same thing since April, March as well. Real quick, what are your thoughts? What's your take on Trump's chances left to actually overturn this election? I did want to bring that up. I know you had a guy on your show about a month, maybe 3 weeks ago or so. I listened to one of the episodes, Lieutenant McInerney or something like that.
McInerney. I can pronounce it correctly.
Yeah, it's a tough one. But that was a really interesting episode. He was talking about the whole Dominion thing and the hammer and nail and all that stuff. But at the end of the episode, he said he'd give about 90% chance of Trump actually winning this thing, and his only doubt was that the Supreme Court might not come into his favor. What are your thoughts on it? What are your chances of him actually taking this thing?
It's hard to handicap the odds. I mean, we're on top of this thing every single day, and I don't want to say it looks good or I don't want to say it looks bad. Here's what I do know, is that the odds of him pulling it out are completely irrelevant to how hard I actually fight on this. It's actually irrelevant and this is a good lesson for people, is pursue the moral good regardless of whether or not you think you're going to win.
Yeah.
And the best kind of illustration of this is nowhere near the type of courage it took to do this versus what we're doing today is when those young men stormed Normandy Beach on D-Day. Their chances of dying were very high. They did it anyway because they were pursuing a moral good. If they were trying to actually weigh whether or not they thought they were going to win, a lot of them would have turned around. Instead, they pursued it because they understood the purpose. They understood exactly what was. They understood why they were fighting. And when 3,000 Americans died on Omaha Beach, that was for a reason. Again, I'm not comparing what we're doing here to the heroic courage of our veterans. What I am saying is I'm using it as an illustration of our heroes and inspiration. That's what I am using it as saying that when you find something that is worth fighting, dismiss the Vegas probability odds and just go do it, and then whatever ends up happening is the result. I'm afraid with the handicapping of odds, sometimes it gives reason and excuses for people to fight less or not contest as much as they otherwise would have.
Yeah, that's a good point. Fair point. And it kind of you fan of the Game of Thrones?
I am.
It reminds me of I got a picture of that one where Jon Snow just like drops his guard belt for the sword and he's like taking on the whole cavalry of charging horses, and you think he's screwed, and then the last second his guys come up and they all start fighting and he ends up winning the battle. It's kind of like the same thing. It's one of my favorite scenes. But it's like you got to do what's good. You got to fight to the very end no matter how bad the odds are. And I actually think that he is going to pull this off if you ask me personally. I've been looking at Rudy. Dick Morris is another good guy who's on top of this as well. And I think he's going to do it. And there's also some amendments, which you probably know a lot more of than me, the 12th Amendment. And there's this executive order he signed in 2018 where he's got some power if there's outside election interference from another country, which clearly there was. And, I'm optimistic, but like you, I'm not going to, stop the fight. What is something, though, that we can do to support the cause and to support the fight that's currently going on? As our listeners, as someone like me who'd like to participate more in this, what is something just the general public can do to support the cause?
I mean, the best thing that every person can do is to take responsibility for your sphere of influence. And so that means to be a precinct committeeman, to host your own rally or protest in your neighborhood. That means to start a phone bank. The point is that don't outsource your activism. It's a very important point. We've outsourced enough to Wuhan and to the Chinese through our manufacturing. Take responsibility for your own political activism. That means I am going to take it very seriously when I see my country go in a direction I don't like. I am going to make the phone calls, knock on the doors, become a precinct committeeman, run for office, school board. That is exactly what is needed to be done. And then also, if people want to get involved in this specific election fight, they can support our program. We've been on top of it. We've been doing probably 50 hours of programming. It's charliekirk.com/support. We've been on top of it more than any other voice that I think that is kind of in the mainstream, if you will. I mean, we've been unafraid to really go in. It's come at a very high personal cost for us. A lot of censorship, a lot of tech nonsense, a lot of advertiser boycotts, all that crap, right? But that's just a reason for us to continue to do it.
All right, cool. So what's the last send-off takeaway message you'd like to leave the Elite Man audience? And then that place our listeners can check out the links to your podcast and also that support link that you were just talking about.
Yeah, if just the last message is we live in the greatest country ever. There's plenty of problems. We're going to try and fix them. But be thankful, not angry, you live here, and apply yourself correctly and go pursue an ultimate good. Go pursue what is true. Go pursue what is beautiful and contest and fight for it. And don't stop complaining. I have enough people complaining in my ear all day long. I get nothing but complaints in my email inbox. I want to hear stories of success and overcoming adversity. That's what it means to be an American, not a Belgian. And that's what we need to continue to protect.
And what's the links for the site?
charliekirk.com if they want to check it out. And if they want to support us, it's charliekirk.com/support. If they want to send me an email, I read every email. Don't respond to them all, but I read them all. They can email me freedom@charliekirk.com.
All right. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks so much for coming on the show, man. I know our guys are going to love this one.